Samantha had always known how to turn heads. Her sleek, shoulder-length hair was a deep chestnut brown with just a hint of silver, but it only added to her air of sophistication. Her sharp blue eyes were bright and confident, and her skin, meticulously cared for over the years, glowed with a radiance that belied her age. At 53, she looked closer to 40, and she was proud of that. As the owner of a luxury beauty salon, she knew every trick to maintain her youthful appearance. But it wasn't just about looks for Samantha. Her confidence and grace were what truly captivated those around her. Despite her success, Samantha's life was far from complete. She had never married, always too focused on her career to settle down. Men had come and gone, but none had captured her heart in a way that lasted. Her salon was her pride and joy, and she had built it from the ground up. Still, there were moments, especially on quiet, solitary evenings, when she wondered if there was something missing. That summer, Samantha decided it was time to take a break. Her work had been all-consuming for months, and she craved a change of scenery. The beaches of Turkey seemed like the perfect escape, a place where she could unwind and recharge. She booked a private villa near the coast and packed her designer luggage, ready for a week of sun and serenity. On the third day of her trip, Samantha found herself lying on a lounge chair by the beach, the gentle hum of the waves lulling her into a peaceful trance. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, sipping on a chilled cocktail as the warm Mediterranean breeze caressed her skin. She felt content, free from the stresses of her business for the first time in what felt like forever. As she gazed out at the horizon, she noticed a young man not far from her. He was tall, athletic, and had an easy, confident smile. His dark hair was tousled by the wind, and his tanned skin shimmered in the afternoon sun. For a moment, their eyes met, and Samantha quickly looked away, feeling a strange flutter in her chest. To her surprise, the man approached her. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice smooth and friendly. Samantha looked up, a little taken aback but not entirely displeased. "Not at all," she said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. The man sat down and introduced himself. "I'm Jack. I noticed you sitting here alone. I thought maybe we could chat." Samantha raised an eyebrow, her natural skepticism kicking in. "Samantha," she replied, "and what exactly did you want to chat about?" Jack chuckled. "Well, for starters, what brings you to Turkey?" "Vacation," she said, keeping her answer short, unsure of his intentions. "I figured," Jack replied with a grin. "It's a beautiful place to relax. I've been here a few times myself." Samantha nodded politely, but couldn't shake the feeling that this young man, he couldn't have been more than 30, was far too charming for his own good. Yet, there was something about him that intrigued her. They continued talking, and to Samantha's surprise, Jack wasn't just another beach flirt. He had a way of drawing her in with his wit and humor, and soon she found herself laughing and forgetting about the age gap between them. Jack told her about his travels, his work as a construction manager, and his passion for surfing. There was an energy about him that was infectious, and Samantha, who had always been so controlled and composed, felt herself beginning to relax in his company. "You don't seem like the kind of woman who needs to get away from anything," Jack said after a while, giving her a curious look. Samantha smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "You'd be surprised. Even the most put-together lives can feel overwhelming sometimes." Jack tilted his head, studying her. "You look like someone who's got everything figured out." "I've worked hard for what I have," Samantha admitted. "But there's more to life than work, right?" Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I agree, and sometimes life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it." Samantha felt her heart skip a beat at his words, though she wasn't sure why. She wasn't used to being caught off guard, especially not by a man half her age. But something about Jack's confidence, his easy manner, drew her in. He made her feel younger, lighter, as if the years that separated them didn't matter. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the beach, Jack turned to her again. "Would you like to join me for dinner tonight? There's a great little restaurant just down the road." Samantha hesitated. She hadn't come to Turkey to start a romance, especially not with someone so much younger. But the way Jack looked at her with such sincerity and interest made her reconsider. "I think I'd like that," she said, her voice soft but confident. Jack's face lit up with a smile. "Great. I'll meet you in the lobby at 7? Samantha nodded, her heart fluttering in a way it hadn't in years. As Jack stood to leave, he glanced back at her, giving her one last smile before walking away. Samantha sat there for a moment, watching the waves crash gently against the shore. She felt something she hadn't in a long time: excitement, anticipation, and the thrill of the unknown. It was as if the years had melted away, and for the first time in a long time, she felt young again. As she gathered her things and headed back to her villa to get ready for dinner, Samantha couldn't help but smile. Maybe life did have a way of surprising you when you least expected it. Back in her countryside home, Samantha felt a renewed sense of energy. After returning from Turkey, she couldn't stop thinking about Jack, the way he had made her feel youthful, vibrant, and full of life. Though she had her doubts about the future of their relationship, given their age difference, Samantha had learned to listen to her heart. The days following her return were filled with late-night phone calls, long text messages, and a growing connection between them. Jack had kept his promise to stay in touch, and soon enough, he was visiting her in the luxurious home she owned just outside the city. It was a spacious estate with manicured gardens, high ceilings, and elegant furnishings, every inch reflecting her hard-earned success. Jack, on the other hand, lived in a modest rented apartment and worked as a manager at a construction company. Despite the contrast in their lifestyles, the chemistry between them only grew stronger. One evening, over a candlelit dinner in her grand dining room, Samantha found herself considering the next step. "Why don't you move in here?" she asked, her voice casual but hopeful. Jack looked up from his plate, clearly surprised by the suggestion. "Move in? You mean, like, live together?" Samantha nodded, taking a sip of wine. "Why not? You're here most of the time anyway. You could have your own space, and we could spend more time together without all the back and forth." Jack leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. "It's a big step." "I know," Samantha replied, a little nervously, "but it feels right, doesn't it?" He smiled warmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It does. I've never lived in a place like this before, though. Are you sure you're okay with it?" Samantha squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with affection. "I'm sure. I want us to be together, Jack. And besides, it's not like I don't have the space." Jack chuckled, glancing around at the expansive room. "Yeah, you definitely have the space." Within a few weeks, Jack had moved into Samantha's home, bringing with him only a few personal items: his clothes, a couple of books, and his surfboard. Samantha found it charming how little he needed compared to her own carefully curated possessions. She gave him one of the guest bedrooms, but more often than not, they shared hers, their lives intertwining in ways Samantha hadn't imagined when she first met him on that Turkish beach. Life seemed perfect, at least for a while. Jack was attentive, kind, and filled with youthful energy. Samantha offered him a job at her beauty salon as her personal driver, thinking it would give them more time together. He accepted gratefully, and soon Jack was driving her to work, waiting for her outside during her long meetings, and accompanying her to social events. He was polite and well-mannered, always there with a smile, making her feel like the center of his world. But as the months passed, Samantha began to notice subtle shifts in their dynamic. Jack, once so eager to spend time with her, began to take her generosity for granted. He grew comfortable with the luxurious life she provided. Too comfortable. Samantha would often return home from long days at work to find him lounging by the pool, playing video games, or spending hours scrolling through his phone. One evening, as Samantha sat in her office reviewing business documents, she noticed Jack leaning against the doorframe. "You've been working a lot lately," he said, his tone casual but hinting at something more. Samantha looked up from her laptop, offering a tired smile. "I have a lot to do. The salon expansion is taking up most of my time." Jack crossed the room, sitting down across from her. "It just feels like we don't get to see each other as much anymore. You're always in the office or at the salon." Samantha sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, but I have to keep the business running. It's not easy staying ahead in the industry, especially with all the competition." Jack frowned, clearly frustrated. "I just thought, with me moving in and everything, we'd get to spend more time together." Samantha closed her laptop and leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. I'm doing this for us, Jack. For our future. You know how important the salon is to me. He looked down at the floor, his hands fidgeting. Yeah, I know. I just didn't expect you to be gone so much. There was a long pause, the air thick with unspoken tension. Samantha wanted to believe that this was just a phase, that Jack would understand the demands of her career, that he would appreciate the life she was building for both of them. But deep down, she sensed a shift, a growing divide between the life she had worked so hard for and the life Jack seemed content to coast through. Look, she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand, I'll try to make more time for us, okay? But I need you to be patient with me. Running this business isn't easy, and I can't afford to slow down right now. Jack looked up, his expression softening slightly. I get it. I just missed the way things were when we first met. It felt like, I don't know, like we were both on the same page. Samantha smiled, though there was a tinge of sadness behind it. We still are, Jack, but life can't always be a vacation. He nodded, though the worry in his eyes remained. I know. I'm just not used to this kind of life. Samantha stood up and walked over to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. It's an adjustment for both of us, but I believe in us, okay? We'll figure this out. Jack wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. I hope so. I just don't want to lose what we have. You won't, Samantha whispered, though deep down she wasn't entirely sure if that was true. As she rested her head against his chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. What had started as a whirlwind romance was beginning to show cracks, and Samantha, ever the optimist, hoped it wasn't the beginning of the end. Months passed, and life for Samantha and Jack continued, but the once electrifying energy between them had faded. Samantha still loved Jack, but her demanding work schedule left little time for the romantic getaways and long, lazy afternoons they had shared in the beginning. Jack, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying his life of luxury more and contributing less. Samantha often found him by the pool, drinking expensive wine or chatting with her staff rather than showing any initiative with his job as her driver. It didn't sit well with her, but love made her overlook his complacency. However, there were signs, small at first, that something was terribly wrong. Samantha had always trusted her instincts, but this time her feelings were clouded by her affection for Jack. She noticed how he would disappear for hours without explanation, like how he became more protective of his phone and how his charm felt increasingly forced, as if he was trying to distract her from something darker beneath the surface. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the salon, Samantha sat in the living room, nursing a glass of red wine. Jack was late, again. She stared at the clock, the minutes ticking by as worry gnawed at her. She had asked him to pick her up from a business meeting earlier that day, but he had been too busy and sent one of her staff drivers instead. It didn't feel right. When the front door finally creaked open, Jack walked in, smiling as if nothing was amiss. Hey babe, he greeted casually, tossing his keys onto the kitchen counter. Sorry I'm late. Samantha remained seated, her eyes fixed on him. Where were you? Jack hesitated, but then shrugged as if it were no big deal. I was just out with some friends. We had a few drinks, lost track of time. Friends? Samantha's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Which friends, Jack? You didn't mention anything about plans today. Jack shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering for the briefest moment. You know, some of the guys from the gym. Samantha's gaze didn't waver. Funny, because I called the gym earlier when I couldn't get a hold of you. They said you hadn't been there in weeks. A tense silence filled the room as Jack tried to gather his thoughts. His confident facade was slipping. He cleared his throat and walked over to the couch, sitting next to her, but Samantha shifted away, her arms crossed. Babe, you're overreacting, Jack said, his voice soft but defensive. I didn't think I needed to check in with you every second of the day. Samantha set her glass down with a clink. It's not about checking in, Jack. It's about trust. I'm not stupid. I've noticed the way you've been acting lately. Secretive, distant. Something's not right, and I deserve to know what it is. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what you want me to say. I've just been stressed lately, okay? It's hard adjusting to your lifestyle, trying to fit into your world. Maybe I needed some space. Samantha's heart ached as she listened to him, but her intuition screamed that there was more to the story. Is there someone else? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's eyes widened, and for a moment there was panic in his expression before he quickly masked it with indignation. What? No. How could you even ask that? Because I'm not blind, Jack. Samantha's voice rose, her frustration spilling over. You've been different, sneaking around, disappearing for hours, always on your phone, and don't think I haven't noticed the way you've been flirting with the staff. Jack's defenses went up. That's ridiculous. You're imagining things. Samantha stood up, her body trembling with anger. I'm not imagining anything. You've been lying to me, and I want the truth. Jack stared at her, his mouth opening and closing as if he were searching for the right words. But before he could respond, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, cutting through the thick tension between them. Samantha frowned. Who could that be at this hour? Jack's face drained of color, but he quickly covered it with a forced smile. I'll get it, he muttered, moving toward the door. But Samantha's gut told her something was wrong, terribly wrong. She followed him, her heart pounding in her chest, as he opened the door to reveal a young woman standing on the doorstep. She was attractive, with blonde hair pulled into a neat ponytail and a smug smile on her face. Samantha recognized her immediately. It was Claire, one of her employees, a secretary who had started working at the salon only a few months ago. Jack, Claire said sweetly, her eyes flicking over to Samantha with an almost taunting gleam. I thought we were meeting up tonight? Samantha's blood turned to ice. Jack froze, his eyes darting between Samantha and Claire. Claire, this isn't a good time. Samantha cut him off, her voice icy and controlled. So this is where you've been disappearing to. Claire didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She simply shrugged, leaning casually against the doorframe. He didn't tell you? Jack tried to speak, but Samantha raised a hand, silencing him. I don't want to hear any more lies, she said, her voice breaking. Just get out, both of you. Samantha, Jack began, but she didn't let him finish. Get out, she yelled, her voice trembling with both fury and heartbreak. I want you out of my house, out of my life. Now. For a moment, Jack looked as if he might argue, but then he saw the resolute look in her eyes. He knew there was no coming back from this. Silently, he grabbed his keys and left without another word, Claire trailing after him with a smirk on her face. The door slammed shut behind them, and Samantha stood in the hallway, her chest heaving with the weight of the betrayal. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had been strong all her life, and she wasn't about to crumble now, not over someone like Jack. That night, after calming down, Samantha found herself alone in her vast bedroom, the emptiness of her house weighing heavily on her. She walked over to the window, staring out at the darkened sky, wondering how she had let herself be so deceived. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from one of her trusted employees at the salon, someone she had confided in about her suspicions. The message contained something that made her stomach turn. A photo of Jack and Claire, sitting together in a cafe, looking far too intimate for Samantha's comfort. It wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the manipulation, and the way Jack had taken advantage of her trust and generosity. And now she had no doubt. He had been using her from the very beginning. Samantha clenched her jaw, determination settling over her like armor. She had built her life from nothing, created an empire with her own hands, and no man, especially not one like Jack, was going to take that away from her. The days after Samantha kicked Jack out were some of the hardest she had ever faced. The sense of betrayal ran deep. She had trusted him, loved him, and welcomed him into her life. To have it all fall apart so cruelly was a wound she wasn't sure would heal. But there was also anger at Jack, and at herself for letting her guard down. She had always prided herself on her intuition, yet Jack had played her with such ease. Determined to regain control, Samantha filed a police report, not just for the theft she suspected, but also for the deceit Jack and his mistress, Claire, had been orchestrating behind her back. She had no idea just how much darker things would become. One evening, a few weeks later, Samantha received a call from Detective Johnson, the officer assigned to her case. Miss Carter, I've got some updates regarding your ex, Jack Turner. His voice was steady, but tinged with something that made Samantha's stomach knot. Go on, she said, trying to stay calm. We've done some digging into Mr. Turner's past, and it's worse than we initially thought. He's been involved in similar incidents before. Samantha's heart raced. What do you mean, similar incidents? Jack Turner is a con artist, Miss Carter. Detective Johnson explained. He targets wealthy women, gets close to them, lives off their resources, and eventually robs them. This isn't the first time he's done it. Samantha leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. She had suspected Jack wasn't who he claimed to be, but hearing the truth hit harder than she had expected. How many women? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We've tracked down at least 3 other victims, Detective Johnson replied. Each one had a similar story to yours. He'd romance them, move in, live off them, then steal valuables and disappear. We believe there are more women out there, but they've either been too embarrassed to come forward or aren't aware yet. Samantha closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the phone. I can't believe I let him into my life, she muttered, more to herself than to the detective. It's not your fault, Detective Johnson assured her. Jack is a professional manipulator. He knows exactly how to charm his way into people's lives. But that's not the worst of it. Samantha's heart pounded. What could be worse? We found evidence that Jack, along with his accomplice Claire, has been planning something far more sinister. They weren't just after your money and possessions. They wanted everything. Samantha's grip on the phone tightened. What do you mean? There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if the detective was carefully choosing his words. We intercepted some messages between Jack and Claire. They were planning to have you killed, Miss Carter. Samantha's blood turned cold. They wanted to make it look like an accident, Detective Johnson continued. Afterward, Jack would have married you in a rushed ceremony, giving him legal claim to your assets. Once you were gone, everything would have gone to him. Samantha couldn't breathe. She felt like the walls were closing in on her, the room spinning around her. Jack had been planning to kill her. The man she had loved and trusted had been plotting her death. Are you okay, Miss Carter? Detective Johnson asked, his voice cutting through the fog of terror. Samantha swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. How did you find this out? We had been monitoring his communications after you filed the report, Detective Johnson explained. We've got enough evidence now to charge both Jack and Claire with conspiracy to commit murder, along with the theft and fraud charges. Samantha sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation sinking in. She had narrowly escaped death. If she hadn't kicked Jack out when she did, she might not be alive to hear this news. What do I need to do? She finally asked, her voice shaking. We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement, the detective said. And I want you to take extra precautions in the meantime. We've arrested Jack and Claire, but it's always good to be careful. I'll send an officer to check on your property regularly until we're sure you're safe. Thank you, Samantha whispered, still in shock. After hanging up, Samantha sat motionless for a long time, staring out the window at the vast gardens that once felt like a sanctuary, but now seemed empty and cold. She had been so close to losing everything, her business, her possessions, her life, all because of a man who had never cared for her. He had been using her from the very beginning. Later that evening, Samantha confided in her best friend Melissa, who came over as soon as she heard the news. I can't believe it, Melissa said, sitting beside her on the couch. I always thought something was off about Jack, but this is insane. I know, Samantha replied, her voice hollow. I trusted him, Mel. I let him into my home, my life, and he was planning to kill me. Melissa reached over and squeezed Samantha's hand. You had no way of knowing. He's a professional con artist. He fooled all of us. Samantha shook her head. I should have seen the signs, the secrecy, the way he distanced himself. I just wanted to believe that he loved me. He didn't deserve you, Melissa said firmly. He was never good enough for you. Samantha's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. I thought I was smarter than this. I thought I could protect myself. You are smart, Melissa insisted. You did protect yourself. You kicked him out. You filed the report. If you hadn't, who knows what would have happened? You saved your own life, Sam. Samantha took a deep breath, trying to absorb her friend's words. She had acted in time, but the thought of how close she had come to losing everything still haunted her. I'm exhausted, Samantha whispered. I gave so much of myself to him, and now I'm left with nothing but the pieces of my own life to pick up." Melissa wrapped her arm around Samantha's shoulders. "You'll get through this. You're the strongest person I know. You built your business from nothing, and you'll rebuild your life the same way. Jack didn't take everything from you. He didn't take you." Samantha leaned into her friend's comforting embrace, grateful for the support. Melissa was right. Jack hadn't destroyed her. She was still standing, still breathing, still alive. And as long as she had that, she had a chance to rebuild. "I'm going to be okay," Samantha said softly, as if trying to convince herself. "You are," Melissa said with certainty, "and one day you'll look back on this and realize it was the turning point. The moment you decided to reclaim your life." Samantha nodded, her resolve hardening. Jack and Claire were going to face justice, and she would move forward. She had come too far in life to let one man destroy her spirit. As Melissa left later that night, Samantha stood by the window, watching the stars twinkle in the clear sky. The truth had been unveiled, and while it had shattered her illusions, it had also set her free. She was stronger than she had ever realized, and now, more than ever, she was ready to rebuild her life. This time, with no one by her side who didn't truly belong. In the months that followed Jack's arrest, Samantha felt a profound shift within herself. She had faced one of the darkest periods of her life. But now, as winter melted into spring, she found herself emerging stronger, more resilient, and with a clearer vision of what she wanted her future to look like. Her business, which had been her sanctuary through the storm, was thriving more than ever. The salon's expansion had been a success, and with the public revelations of Jack and Claire's criminal activities, Samantha's reputation as a strong, independent woman only grew. She was no longer just the owner of a successful beauty salon. She was a survivor, a symbol of resilience in the face of betrayal. But as much as her professional life soared, it was her personal life that took on new meaning. Samantha had spent years pouring herself into her business, and the betrayal had shown her that she needed more balance. She began focusing on herself, not just physically, but emotionally. She traveled more, taking solo trips to places she had always wanted to visit but never had the time for. She rediscovered her love of painting, a hobby she hadn't indulged in since her early 20s. Most importantly, she surrounded herself with true friends, people who genuinely cared for her, like Melissa, who had been her rock throughout the ordeal. One warm afternoon, Samantha sat in the garden behind her home, the sun casting a golden glow on the flowers that were just beginning to bloom. She sipped her tea, savoring the peacefulness that had once seemed so out of reach. The past few months had been about reclaiming her sense of self, healing from the trauma, and redefining what she wanted her life to be. As she set her teacup down, her phone buzzed with a message. It was Robert, a man she had met a few months ago at a charity event. He was older than Jack had been, closer to her own age, and in their few interactions, she had found him to be kind, patient, and most importantly, genuine. There were no grand gestures or smooth lines with Robert, just quiet understanding and mutual respect. Robert's text. "Would you like to grab dinner tonight? There's a new restaurant I've been wanting to try, and I'd love for you to join me." Samantha smiled as she read the message. She hadn't expected to meet anyone after everything she had been through, but Robert had slowly earned her trust. Their relationship was moving at a pace that felt right for her. No rushing, no pressure, just two people enjoying each other's company. She typed a quick reply. "That sounds perfect. See you at 7?" Later that evening, Samantha met Robert at the restaurant, a cozy spot on the edge of the city that was bustling but intimate. They were seated at a small table near the window, the dim lighting casting a warm glow over the room. Robert was waiting for her when she arrived, standing as she approached. "You look beautiful," he said with a genuine smile, pulling out her chair for her. "Thank you," Samantha replied, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. As they sat down, their conversation flowed effortlessly, just as it always did. Robert told her about his latest business ventures. He ran a successful real estate firm, and asked about the salon's expansion. "I've been keeping an eye on it," Robert said, sipping his wine. "It seems like things are going great." Samantha nodded. "They are. It's been a lot of work, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished. After everything that's happened, I feel like the business is stronger than ever. Robert's eyes softened with understanding. You've been through a lot, Samantha. I admire how you've come out on the other side of it all. Samantha paused, taking a moment to reflect. I didn't think I'd ever get through it at first. The betrayal, the lies, it all felt so overwhelming. But I had to remind myself that I've faced challenges before. This was just a different kind of challenge. And you handled it with grace, Robert said, his voice sincere. Not many people could have come out of something like that stronger. Samantha smiled, feeling a sense of pride and peace she hadn't felt in a long time. It took a while to get here, but I'm finally at a place where I feel whole again. I've learned that my life doesn't depend on anyone else. It's mine, and I'm in control of it. Robert leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. I've always believed that strength comes from within. You don't need anyone to complete you, but it's nice to have someone who appreciates and respects you for who you are. Samantha nodded, appreciating his words. Exactly. That's what I've been trying to focus on, surrounding myself with people who bring something positive to my life, not take away from it. There was a pause, comfortable and unhurried. Robert reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle and warm. Samantha, I want you to know that I'm not in a rush. I enjoy spending time with you. And whatever pace you're comfortable with, that's what we'll go with. Samantha looked at him, her heart full but calm. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of being vulnerable. I appreciate that, Robert. After everything, I'm cautious, but I like where things are going with us. Robert smiled. So do I. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything from their favorite books to their future dreams, and for the first time, Samantha allowed herself to think about the possibility of love again. This time, it was different. There were no grand illusions, no whirlwind romance that felt too good to be true. What she had with Robert was built on mutual respect, understanding, and a deep connection that was slowly growing into something more. When the evening came to a close, Robert walked Samantha to her car. The cool night air brushed against her skin, and the stars sparkled above them. As they stood by her car, Robert hesitated for a moment before speaking. I had a wonderful time tonight, he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. So did I, Samantha replied, her voice equally soft. There was a brief silence before Robert leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek. Good night, Samantha. Good night, Robert, she whispered, feeling the warmth of his touch linger as she watched him walk away. As Samantha drove home, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The darkness of betrayal had given way to something new, something full of hope and promise. She wasn't rushing into anything, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. When she arrived home, Samantha stood in her garden for a few moments, breathing in the fresh night air. The moonlight bathed the flowers in a soft glow, and everything felt peaceful. Samantha smiled to herself. She had survived the worst, rebuilt her life, and opened her heart again, not just to love, but to herself. She was stronger than ever, and whatever came next, she was ready for it. This was her new beginning.